a Republican pollster went into the White House to say, listen, you're not focusing on the affordability crisis.
Mm.
And he then later gave an account of this meeting to the Washington Post, in which he said that the president then turned the conversation towards golf and how much money he'd recently raised.
Well, look, let's now return to another important story that's likely to happen later today. And that, of course, it's the Epstein files, because today marks the deadline for the release of those documents. This is a big issue in the States. It's a big issue across the world. All eyes are on this, and it's dogged the Trump administration. The Attorney General, Pam Bondi, has said that the Department of Justice will follow the law when it comes to these Epstein documents. Democrats on the House Oversight Committee have released a new batch of photos from the estate of the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, including some very weird and quite uncomfortable photographs of a young woman's body scrawled with quotes from the notorious novel Lolita, which of course was all about a paedophile. Let's now speak with Will Pavia, who's New York correspondent for The Times. Will, hi, welcome to the show.
Hey, Aisha.
So what have you picked up so far? Is this a big news day in America? Is everyone poised, waiting for this? Have you had any sort of idea of timing or whether this is going to happen?
Yes, it is a big deal here. And certainly lots of people are waiting and wondering when and if it's going to drop. I don't have any sense yet of timing. I mean, the law says that the deadline is today. I don't know if there will be some wiggle room in terms of how the stuff is released, or whether they argue that, certain redactions have to still be made. But at the moment, everyone is expecting to start seeing things today. And that's sort of where we are.
And how has Trump and his sort of aides, how have they been paving the way for the release of these documents? What's their kind of narrative?
Well, I mean, his spokeswoman, Caroline Levitt, said recently that no one had done more than Trump to bring these documents to light, which is kind of a strange argument, given that he spent a lot of the summer trying to stop this law from passing, or this legislation from passing, which essentially ordered the release of these documents. There's also been suggestions and reporting that, Republicans are going to try to deflect or sort of shift the blame, and sort of point to the fact that a lot of Democrats, a lot of prominent Democrats were, involved with Epstein and were associated with him. So that seems to sort of be the playbook, and to sort of, we will obviously know that President Trump was friends with Epstein for a while. But it doesn't seem as if there is anything that would, implicate him in any way, as the same ought to be said for a lot of other Epstein's other powerful friends. So that seems to be their playbook and how they're going to respond.
And I mean, how much damage could this do to Trump? Or do you think it's one of these issues which is already baked in the sense of, if you don't like Trump, you'll jump to an assumption, and if you do like Trump, you'll say he's done nothing wrong?
I think there's a lot of damage done with his base, because this is something that the sort of, the MAGA faithful wanted to see, and they couldn't understand why he wasn't just sort of releasing them. And so I think that perhaps did some damage. On the other hand, it doesn't appear that there's anything that is, necessarily incriminating in terms of the president. Yes, we know he was friends with Epstein for a long time. They had some sort of falling out. We're not quite sure. Lots of different explanations have been offered for what that might be. So I think there were supporters of his who were very disappointed and angry that he seemed to be reluctant to release the documents, or that his administration did. But I'm not sure. It's very hard to tell what kind of damage it may do him in the long run. Of course, a lot depends on what's in them.
And who else should be anxious today? I mean, obviously, the former Prince Andrew, other British names. I mean, Peter Mandelson, there's no allegation that he's been involved in anything improper, but do you think his name could come up in these files?
I mean, certainly it could. It's sort of everyone who was associated with him. The argument that Trump has made in the past is that, I don't want to release these files because any, person who might have happened to have been friends with Epstein could somehow be tarred by this brush. And, obviously that's a slightly self-serving argument, you might say, because we know that he was, a friend of Epstein's for quite a while. But yes, I mean, I think it's one of those strange things where Peter Mandelson, I think, had previously acknowledged that he'd, known Epstein, and then suddenly there were photographs of him, in his pajamas or looking at, the card that he sent to Epstein about looking out the window, waiting for him to arrive, and suddenly he had to resign. So it's one of those sort of things. Sometimes a photograph is more powerful than you expect it to be, or is perhaps tells you more than you even thought you already knew. So yes, I think there are lots of people who will be nervous. Yesterday's release included sort of pictures from a business lunch in 2011, and you could see one of the founders of Google, Sergey Brin, was there. So was a New York Times columnist, David Brooks.
Mm.
And it was a business dinner, lots of business leaders, and there was Epstein as well. And all of those people could say, well, I didn't attend to meet Epstein. I attended to go to this dinner with movers and shakers, important people, and Epstein happened to be there too. But that there's a certain sort of cast of mind here that, believes that powerful people are sort of involved in nefarious schemes, and Epstein is sort of the proof of that. And so it always raises these sort of questions, I suppose, and it's a difficult thing if you had any
association. Well, I think that's going to be the really interesting thing, because as you say, a photograph a photograph with Jeffrey Epstein doesn't necessarily mean that you have done anything bad. But if there's many pictures of somebody cozying up to Jeffrey Epstein, it again, it's that sort of, there's this club of sort of elite, and it does tend to be men who are networking together, and they fish in the same pool, and they're part of that kind of power network, and that will make a lot of people uncomfortable, even though of course the very important to state that doesn't necessarily mean that anyone has done anything wrong. Well, Will, what time do you expect? Do you have any time scale for when you think this might be released?
I'm afraid I don't.
Okay.
Don't.
No, you'll be on tenterhooks. Now, one question I must ask you before we let you go. These new presidential plaques at the White House, I mean, my goodness, they're quite something. How have they gone down in your part of the world, Will?
Well, I must admit, I've not been paying attention to this, Aisha. So you're going to have to brief me. Do you mean the Walk of Fame?
Yes.
That now occupies the colonnade.
Yes, where he's basically slagged everybody off.
Yes. I honestly, I'm afraid I can't tell you. I mean, it's a very strange thing to see, this kind of, gilding of the side of the White House. Although, of course, at the same time, the East Wing of the White House has been entirely demolished. So, so nothing is.
And what's
all
been
that
the reaction
surprising.
like in America to this? I mean, in terms of again, is there sort of widespread outrage, or are people just like, it's fine, he can do what he wants, or is it kind of split on sort of polarized lines?
No, I think the damage is that everybody wanted Trump, or thought people who voted for Trump thought that he was going to tackle affordable living in America and get prices down and lower inflation. And so when you see the president knocking down the East Wing in order to build an enormous ballroom, or when you see him, gilding the Oval Office and the colonnade, and putting up these plaques and whatnot, you are, you suspect that his priorities are elsewhere. So I think that's sort of been the main damage is sort of this idea that maybe he is aloof, that he's not paying attention
And
to the things that really matter.
are his poll ratings down at the moment?
Yes, they've not been very good. And in fact, there was a story, I think last week, in which a Republican pollster went into the White House to say, listen, you're not focusing on the affordability crisis. And he then later gave an account of this meeting to the Washington Post, in which he said that the president then turned the conversation towards golf and how much money he'd recently raised at a golf do for Lindsey Graham. So there is a sort of sense, I think, that he's not focused. I suppose the other thing about the White House renovations is this sense that he's not acting like a man who is only there for 4 years. That there's a slight sense, particularly among his Democratic opponents, who sort of say, well, when a president entirely changes the shape and look of the White House, he's acting more like a man who plans to stay than a man who is temporarily in the
Gosh,
post.
that is such a good observation. That is so interesting. I mean, I have to say, just in terms of cost of living, I was in America a couple of weeks ago, and the one thing you really notice is the cost of food. It is so expensive. I mean, I was really shocked by how expensive food is in the States right now.
Yes, you can buy a liter of milk and it's $12. I mean, it's it's
I mean, you
very
just buy like
expensive.
a sandwich and it's like $15. You're like, wow, that is nuts. That is really well. Look, Will, great to catch up with you. Thank you very much for your time. Have a wonderful Christmas. That's Will Pavia, who is the New York correspondent for the Times there.